So Conrad is almost an example of this himself, being of Polish background and then moving to England. So he'll never be fully English, but he's also so changed from his experience there that he's never fully Polish again. And
Right.
maybe that's what assimilation is. You know,
Yeah.
and maybe that's what kind of the thing that the quiet part that doesn't get talked about out loud when it comes to America. Uh,
Yes.
you know,
I think that's very true.
now they're called immigrant stories. And that's probably a spicy take from me, to say that Heart of Darkness is a proto immigrant story. But when you read some like New York Times bestsellers, right? Like there's this one that they all loved that I couldn't really stand, called. Have you ever read The Sympathizer?
No, I can't say I have.
It's about, so this Vietnamese guy, he's in the Viet Cong, and he wants to be like a sleeper agent for the Viet Cong in America, right? And he immigrates to the States, and his plan is to, like, I think it's been a long time since I read it, but I think he wants to assassinate somebody in the US, right? Uh,
Hmm.
but over time he gets sort of Americanized, right? And he's all his ideals, his communist ideals kind of fall away. There's even oh, what do you call it? Uh, did you ever see that show Whitest Kids You Know? Yeah, yeah, no. I
Yeah.
mean, this is the kind of podcast that anything can get thrown at you. But so in Whitest Kids You Know, there is a sketch that they do. This guy Bill comes home from Vietnam, and his friends are all stoked for him, right? But they kind of notice that something's not right, and it's they're oblivious to the fact that Bill has been replaced by a Vietnamese guy, and it's clearly, like, he's clearly Vietnamese. He's got an accent, he's Asian, and they all act oblivious, and they kind of, but they do piece it together, right? And that's the joke. And then, like, Bill's parents come in, they have no idea what's going on. They're like, "Isn't it so great to have Bill back?" Uh, and I don't know. I always found that funny, so I figured I'd drop that in.
Yeah. No.
Let
Go ahead.
Oh, no, no. I was just gonna suggest that we kind of move to maybe the plot of the book, and what we'll do is we'll traverse the river that is this novella, and hopefully along the way we'll maintain our sanity.
Indeed. So the beginning of the book, or at least the part that all seems to go together, is the first part is sort of his preparation for setting out on the Great River. And there are sort of several kind of, you get a very, like, a baseline motif of what are very surface level ideas of the colonial experience. There's these missionaries, I think, that he runs into, and he has to be examined by various boards to basically give him this task of going into the heart of darkness, as it were.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a particular, I mean, first of all, this part of the story seems really slow in a certain sense compared to the rest of it, at least when I read it. But Conrad does a wonderful job with the prose here. Like, when you sort of stop, when you're not reading it like a novel, when you're reading it kind of more like, when you're poring over it in a certain sense, it's incredible what he's able to do with the English language, considering that he is not he's not a native. English is not his first language, but he just has this incredible prose that he's writing in sort of beginning the story. And that in and of itself, I think, is really remarkable, that he has this command of the language that frankly surpasses surpasses a lot of people. I mean, this is sort of like, if we wanted to go back to the point about like immigrant stories, like the people that get called immigrants now are at best kind of, you know, butchering our language, or at very least they're barely passable. But Conrad has a command of the English language that is just truly incredible. And even the like little bits of wisdom that he puts in these very early passages. There's one that my favorite is the doctor gives him some statement that's essentially, in the tropics, one must, before everything, remain calm.
And that, yeah, that's he I've read a bunch of Conrad, and that is definitely the theme that comes back over and over again, is that this guy, it's weird, he has contempt for a certain kind of Englishman, right?
Yes.
He has contempt, especially for that sort of almost like the Flash man English adventurer.
Yeah. Like almost the archetype of John Smith, right? The swashbuckler.
Right.
Like he just is like, yeah, you have no idea. You have no idea what you're doing.
Right. But also he also has an immense respect for the language and for the culture, because what he does too is and we talked about this before the show as well. The way that he tells it is very kind of in a traditional English way, you know, even harkening back to like Canterbury Tales, where it's a story told as a story rather than, you know, just he is the author and he's writing out this guy's life. No, it's he's writing this guy who is telling us, the reader, and other unseen, unknown people, his life story. So it's very much it's very much framed in an English way in some sense.
Yeah, it's framed in a certain sense like a quest, right? Like the thing about the English novel is there's a large sense in which you can kind of like skip parts of it, and it doesn't matter so much. You can still kind of, you know, you still got it. And the thing about Heart of Darkness is that's just not true of this story at all. You really have to have the whole thing, or you just lose the plot entirely. And that's something that's also a profound skill that he's able to employ throughout the novel, is that you really don't feel like any one page could be sacrificed. You have to go through the whole thing.
Yes, it is very, there's no fat in the story at all, definitely.
Which, I mean, go ahead.
No, I was doing an episode with Lomez the other day, and we were discussing a novella by Jim Harrison called Legends of the Fall, and there too we were talking about just these, you know, these not perfect works, but like perfectly plotted, perfectly written, sort of like just no fat in every word and every phrase needs to be there, otherwise the thing kind of falls apart. You know, and I think Heart of Darkness is one of those.
Yeah, I so agree. I mean, it has this sort of sense about it. You know, it sounds cliche to say, but you know, the rising tension in this story is just built better than any book that I've ever read, in terms of keeping you in it the whole way, of this sort of like drip 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 of what's happening, because it's working on multiple levels, right? I mean, there's the very basic plot of what's happening, there's the very material plot, but there's this spiritual sense too, of the drip 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 of this quest. And that, I think, is another reason this novel has really stood the test of time, is this sense of like, it's not only a harrowing physically, it's not just an adventure story, it's really a harrowing of a soul. And he's able to do that in a way that, you know, there are a lot of great adventure novels, and I'm even a fan of the pulp works that became very popular in the last century, but they're just not able to bring you along on a spiritual, a religious quest in that sense, the way that this story is.
There's so And I could make another English allusion there. It's like almost Arthurian,
Oh, absolutely.
but it's like the like if Gawain were searching for the Grail, but then had to sacrifice something, and he doesn't come back quite the same, because in the King Arthur tales, it's kind of back to status quo for most of the guys until Lancelot, really, you know.
Right.
And I mean, really, actually, you could say that Lancelot kind of brings that heart of darkness to Camelot.
Indeed. I would agree with that. Although I have not my familiarity with those stories is pretty much like the bedtime tale version, and that's it.
Right. I've got a guest coming on. As soon as I finish the book, we're gonna do the man who would be or no, sorry, not the man who would be the once and future king by T.H. White. Man who would be king. Maybe you and I will do that down the line by Kipling. Because
Kipling's another example of this, right?
That's
he's
a
another
traditional
guy
adventure
who is not really English anymore. Like, obviously Kipling, he's a Anglo-Indian, and his experience is there. I mean, you want to talk about the advent of what a white person is. I mean, Kipling is perhaps the foremost white poet that you could say of anyone. And it's because he comes out of this colonial experience that, in a certain sense, makes him just unable to relate to England the same way. I mean, his poetry is very, very well liked in England, as far as I can tell. But everyone I've ever met who loves Kipling, like really, really loves him, they're all either American or South African or Australian. It's always, it's the Anglo-colonial peoples, because that's what Kipling was.
But then you have the opposite side of the spectrum too, with someone like Orwell, right? Who also grew up in India. He was a policeman in India, right? But he comes away almost like Marlowe, in a sense, where when he gets to England, he's kind of disgusted by it.
Yeah. You can definitely tell that. And I mean, in 1984 too, like, to touch on Orwell, that's obviously you could maybe say Animal Farm is his most famous, but like the works in 1984, at least, strikes me as a very, very English view of totalitarianism, even in a way that, like, I would say maybe Animal Farm really isn't.
I think that's apt, because it's England. If you had to summarize English culture in a word, you'd use queuing. There's a certain order to Englishness. Not so much like, there's obviously like German parallels to order, but there's something uniquely British about queuing. And
Yes.
you get that sense kind of from 1984. And I'm sorry, I didn't mean to bring you on to just talk about the English canon of the last 200 years, but I mean, just it's difficult, because in a lot of ways
everything's connected, isn't it? Like, it all sort of flows into each other.
You can read Conrad's fingerprints. He was that massive that you can read his fingerprints into almost everything coming out of England since he wrote this.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, in a certain sense, you could say he created a whole new genre, right, of English writing that kind of didn't exist. I mean, arguably, of course, yes, it did. There's these echoes that came before, but there is a sense in which he created something totally new.
It's like adventure noir.
Yeah. Well, man, okay, noir, that's another thread we could pull pull on that sort of connects here.
Right. I mean, just like the psychological aspects of not only Kurtz's descent into madness, but sort of Marlowe's as he goes up the river. You know, it's clear that he's just kind of being torn away at in his mind.
Yes.
And there's that critical scene towards the end where he's trying to get Kurtz out of there, but he's pulled to stay almost. It's like there's this like the heart of darkness, the blank spaces on the map are too tempting for him to almost he almost kind of throws it away. He throws away everything about himself to stay and to actually to assimilate to the chaos and to the horror.
Yes. There's to jump all the way back. Frederick Jackson Turner has this quote about, and he's the guy behind the Frontier thesis. And he has this quote that is essentially something like, "The wilderness masters the colonist."
Mm.
And I think that is very apropos here. You know, we talk about film noir. The thing that distinguishes film noir from like a crime film, right, is in a film noir, like the place, the setting itself is a character. The setting is acting on our protagonists and antagonists and everyone else. The setting itself is reaching into the story and pulling in various directions. And I mean, that's something that is it's so a part of Heart of Darkness, that
Right.
this blank place on the map, like it's acting on you.